which is in the heaven of music, Paradiso 15:17. Dante appears here as a peace poet. The tradition of peace poetry in Western literature, as you know, is fairly slim. Poets, think of Bertrand del Born, think of Ezra Pound, write usually of a call to arms, or in our age at best, think of Hemingway, of a farewell to arms. But they never write of peace as the scandal of the way of the world. In Paradiso 15 and 17, Dante encounters his grandfather, a crusader to Jerusalem, one who had fought the war for peace. And around this figure, Dante evokes the city of Florence of old and its confusion. Dante still believes, no doubt, in a providential empire that would unify and order the appetites of all men. Just as polyphonic music, which is heard in these cantos, is made of contrapuntal voices, this point of the empire has its own powerful counterpoints. Here Dante recalls communal virtues of peace, humble poverty, continence, the education of children, and his own exile. Exile is not merely the future experience of the pilgrim or the metaphoric structure of the poem. There is an ethics of exile, which is the poet's imaginative rendition of the necessity of order, as well as his recognition that patterns of order are ultimately illusory and fragile, that one is called to belong to the city and at the same time live like a stranger in that city, that one is in time and, in every sense of the phrase, out of time. In this ethics of exile, there is hope for hospitality, courtesy, and freedom. All of these virtues constitute what can be called an affective morality as opposed to a rational morality, in the sense that they show that harmony rests upon men's will to share in and be part of an interdependent world. As always, Dante, with his poetry's ethics, returns us to history and to the awful responsibilities of time, to the truths of facts, and not merely to the truths of reasons. There, or here, in history, he asks of us to put the wolf into the web of which he has set the warp. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Mazzotta, from your very great wealth of knowledge and of sentiment. Thank you for giving us an insight also into the genius of Dante and that journey of becoming, where he discovered the relationships, the resemblances among things, between things. Now, I'm sure that you have some questions for him because he has raised many, many things.
You mentioned how things rise up and live in the poor. I have classes very well. It is said, when the average travelers stake out the empty space by their own way, at quite indeterminate times and places, they pour ever so little in the court. That means you need to disarray in order to get order. Some people say, I don't know, you can explain how the disarray is actually needed to cause order.
Well, you mean in Lucretius, let me just state the point here. In Dante, he may not have known the text of Lucretius at all. That's not all that important. But had he known it, he would have not derived in any way proposed exactly this kind of idea. That idea was very common also in a variety of ways. The Epicureans were mostly pushing for the same kind of notion. And the opposition to this idea of disarray is that in a certain this intrinsic, this fragility of whatever is happening that would take it as a slight movement away from a pattern, and they can always happen. Things will be going haphazardly. In a sense, it would be logically difficult for Dante to accept, because it implies the existence of a power, only that it's a malevolent power. So that would be a further critique of here. In other words, the Lucretian notion would seem to be the exact counter to Dante's idea of order. Only that Dante begins with a formless primal matter, and there is an intervention of order which is providential and stable. This is never the case in Lucretius.
One of the things I think Lucretius is trying to do is to show that there was free will by the idea of the phenomenon, whereas Epicurus and Demosthenes specifically were very deterministic. Well, maybe Dante would have been a little bit more sympathetic to Lucretius and had he read it.
Yeah, I have read it. The tradition is always one of the tradition is one of fooling him. It's like a mystic idea with the Epicurean ideas, which for that to imply many things. And I think that it's also true for Lucretius. Without the lecture is on Dante, but I certainly would not run away from an argument over Lucretius. I think that the reason would be the following. Once you posit a deterministic universe, how can you have history? It's as simple as that. It's not so much because the space of moral freedom can always be debated, and we know that throughout the Renaissance are going to be debated. Luther, Erasmus, and so on, they go on debating about exactly all that. But to say there is an organized, a determined structure, then the question is, how can I make history at all? This is where Dante really departs from the Epicureans. It's not so much of where am I really free? That space of moral freedom, what does it mean? But that's debatable. That's, we may argue about the extent of that. But what is no longer possible, it would seem from Dante's point of view, is a genuine theory of history as the place which men make. Where would the Lucretius be the case? I can see that very rejection of Venus, the conclusive statements on Athens, the city of philosophy, which now has become the city of death. The general darkness of that world. This is what Dante would. I think, in a certain sense, it's the easier way out from Dante's point of view.
Any other?
Please, yes.
In your lecture, you put strong emphasis upon both the Neoplatonic as well as Augustinian sources. Much of the conception.
Very good.
And, but also part not incompatible with that Neoplatonic Augustinian worldview, which is a Gnostic worldview. And yet you say Dante completely rejected that sort of Gnostic dualism.
Yes. In fact, I think you have hit the real quicksand of my argument, where I myself am afraid I'm going to be swallowed up. I do insist on the Neoplatonic because partly out of an obvious reaction to the way of reading Dante in scholastic terms, though Dante's debts to scholasticism are very obvious. Nonetheless, he would criticize scholasticism for playing down the importance of poetry and the importance of aesthetics in general. The turn to the Neoplatonic tradition, to the Victorines, the 12th century, the Abbey of St. Victor, would be, and the Augustinian, the general Augustinian heritage, would be crucial because it allows him to make powerful claims about aesthetics. Nonetheless, as soon as we talk about Neoplatonism, then the relationship is, and there is always a danger, because I'm certainly not the one who has invented an Augustinian background for Dante's thought. Nonetheless, you are right to sense that I am also trying to take my own distance from, and I'm pleased from that kind of reading. Why? Because basically, a a rigorous Augustinian reading of Dante really implies devalorizing the sense of history, devalorizing the world of immanence and the middle ground. And I think that this is exactly where Dante moves. In a certain way, to read Dante along the Neoplatonic dualism, the Gnostic dualism, would be tantamount to reading Dante in terms of Aquinas, with the same kind of devalorization of aesthetics, of history, and of the middle ground. This is, so you're quite right to sense that I'm trying to have it both ways. Assert the importance of Neoplatonic thought, and I certainly do that, which is important for Dante's aesthetics, but at the same time pull away from the implications of a radical Augustinianism, which is basically dualistic. And I'm sure that in Augustine it's much less dualistic than it is in the Augustinian readers, but that's another story. Of course. Yes?
I'd like to introduce a qualification on one of the comparisons you made happening between ironically contrasting Dante as a peace poet against Ezra Pound. Because, of course, Pound wrote not only the verse on Sistina Forte, but also wrote the section of Thrones in the Canto. And also in his Canto 72, the Italian Canto, he wrote, in contrast to Marinetti, which he sent from England, you wanted war, I wanted peace.
I'm very happy you said that. I'm aware that it was a sort of fast. I mean, when I think of the peace poets, I certainly would have to include Isaiah. I certainly would have to include Tolstoy. I obviously would include the Gospels. I'm glad even, I mean...
Well, I think you should include Ezra Pound, too.
Well, in a sense, only that there is a way in which one can become a little too sentimental about these ideas of peace. I'm also drawn to his awareness that, and that's when in a certain way where paradoxically I find him closer to the concerns of peace, is when he feels that forms of violence, his own included, will have to be exposed. That to me is a way in which there is more clearly and more appealing, let me say, a desire to pull away from simply the exaltation of violence. I'm also reminded of his long meditations on usury, his economical reading of history and so on, that makes me, I don't know, I think that he would enjoy being placed side by side with Bertrand de Born. But you probably,
I just spend a lot of spiritual gravity recognition in terms of the inferno and in terms of purgatory. Please explain in terms of the inferno.
yes, well, in terms of, I'm happy you understand that in Paradiso, in a certain way, there is no such a thing as spiritual gravity, because all of the blessed appear in what we would call a finalized form. Paradise itself, as you know, is an exorbitant performance, but paradise, Dante goes out of the way to say, is not what we see here. The blessed are all in the bosom of Abraham. But now they go and show, but there is, in paradise, there is a theoretical articulation of the idea of spiritual gravity, this idea of the displacement, which poetically is already dramatized, you're right, in Inferno 14. When, for those of you who may not recall, when Dante asks, where are these famous people that we used to know in our neighborhood? And Dante, the response would be, there among those, the darker souls, and a further weight will pull them down. Now, clearly, it's the pondus amoris. And in Purgatorio, the whole notion of an ascent of Purgatorio is to be pulled up like fire. But in Paradise, in and of itself, there is no dramatics of spiritual gravity, only a theoretical statement. Yes?
Would you want to say then that because Dante presents conditions rather than a rational explanation, that he uses his aesthetic strategy to try to avoid the
Yes, unless, but I would have immediately to qualify that. I would agree with that. I really think that that's what he's doing, but